inspire you to be more of every role within the Salesforce ecosystem and beyond. For today's episode, we are exploring what it means to be more ADHD aware at work. And I am joined today by Ed. So if you could start by introducing yourself to our audience, please.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Ed Gray. I've been working nonstop with Salesforce Marketing Cloud Engagement or Exact Target for about 5 years. I'm a marketing champion, a user group leader. I've presented at a lot of things. And really, I've become a lot more aware about neurodivergency and ADHD and how, being more cognizant of that has made me more effective at work, but also in other areas of my life. But we're going to focus on work today.
Okay. Awesome. Well, excited for this chat, and hopefully I'll pick up a tip or two along the way as well. So looking forward to that. So perhaps try to break it down or quantify it for us a little bit. Like, what would you think, or how would you describe it meant to be more ADHD aware at work? Like, would you be able to put that into words for us, do you think?
Yeah, I really think you have to become like conscious of something, and
Mhm.
these things are complicated, so it's not like it's always expresses itself the same in one person, but having like labels and words to describe this behavior, and kind of having like a scientific or medical approach to it that isn't based in like guilt or like not being as moral or disciplined as someone else, and just accepting that our brains work differently than the majority of people, or what we would call neurotypicals, and finding ways to work with that, and not just accepting the downsides of it, which are real too.
Okay. All right. And I think that's ultimately kind of a little bit about giving yourself some leeway and kindness as well as others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. um, so I think it's really important to avoid like ADHD or neurodivergent versus neurotypical. Like the
Mhm.
reality is, we need neurotypicals in our life, and we need kind of the structure that they provide. And they can be allies and they can be understanding. So don't just assume that because your boss or your coworkers, aren't ADHD like you, that they can't understand it and be supportive of you. I do think we all have times when we've been vulnerable with people and gotten burned
Mhm.
with it, but we've also had times when we've been vulnerable with people, and it helps us build connections, and they can support us and help us, and vice versa. So yeah, I think it's really focused. It's important not to only focus on those times we were, burned for whatever reason, by being open and authentic with people, um, and accepting like there are times when that works out for the best, and maybe there's times that don't.
Yeah. Okay. And if you were thinking about this as somebody who's kind of being ADHD aware, as we're kind of coining the phrase right now, what kind of qualities or skills would you say that person would have that would make them ADHD aware? Like, what sort of perhaps behaviors or habits are is this type of person typically kind of keeping an eye out for and adapting accordingly?
Yeah. So not everyone has ADHD. A lot of people at various times will struggle with focusing, um,
Hmm.
or whatever other symptoms at one point. But typically, it comes down to our brains don't produce enough dopamine for us to like um, be content or happy, when neurotypicals might. So we're always like finding ways to seek out that dopamine for us, and that can lead to risky behaviors like gambling or drug use. But even if it doesn't get that dark for you, it's going to affect every area of your life, including your work relationships. And I will say, particularly in the Salesforce space, I do think there's a lot of ADHD people, or autistic people, or dyslexic people. I think it's particularly in the consulting world. I
Hmm.
think it's really helpful. There's certainly downsides to it, like varying degrees of energy and so on, and your interests can change, and that can be difficult. But that can be great in consulting. Like you're always meeting new people, you're always taking on new challenges, you're always needing to learn new things in a way that can be very stimulating to the ADHD brain. And I would say, we're really good at pattern recognition, which
Mhm.
can be great for like cleaning data. It can be great for like building automations. Um, so I really think like particularly in the consulting and somewhat the developer space, it can you can be really high functioning and have a successful career um,
Nice.
in those spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So thinking about this now and perhaps a little bit like thinking about your own journey as well, what do you think makes Salesforce different to other ecosystems? Like, why um, does a Salesforce ecosystem potentially have more of these people than other ecosystems? Like, is it perhaps more open to everybody? Is it because of the skill set? What do you think?
Uh, yeah, I mean, just like go to our conventions and we have these silly mascots. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like that's the result of like there's ADHDers like at the top of this space who are like creating things that work for them and kind of attract us, I think. And I do think, and I don't want to knock other like tech spaces like
Hmm.
Microsoft or Amazon, but it's definitely it's a bit more understanding than I'd say like left of center ecosystem when compared to those spaces. So I don't. Yeah, I think being a nerd or like being a little bit socially awkward and being like hyper focused on like a particular software thing, it's kind of like celebrated in this space in a way that it's not always. So I think that's part of it. I do think working with databases and meeting new people and solving challenges and problems like that's kind of what we do in the
Hmm.
Salesforce space. So yeah, I'd say that's why.
Okay. Perfect. And if there's somebody that's kind of perhaps on their own journey to be more ADHD aware at work, what tips or advice would you give to that person?
So obviously, there's just way more knowledge about this topic now than
Mhm.
there ever has been.
Yeah.
Um, I'm 42 now. I think I became aware that I was like expressing ADHD symptoms when I was like 30 or a little bit older than that, and had, kind of the tools and knowledge to approach that in a way that wasn't like religious based guilt, like I was raised a
Yeah.
lot of the times. So there's tons of resources, whether it's Googling or there's even coaches. I think you've had a coach on
Mhm.
this podcast before.
Yeah.
So like even those kind of positions are creating and I think, recognizing that there are a lot of ADHD people in the Salesforce space, and they're not just like they're out there giving speeches, they're out there going outside their comfort zone, they're people leaders. Like, don't assume that like you have these that it's going to be a limitation for you. Um, and yeah, in true fashion, I kind of forgot what you asked me. Okay, so yeah, what allies can do and be more
Yeah.
responsive to. So like kind of be aware that like what works for us one day might not work the next day. Um, and what we want one day and say we're wanting and we're building a goal towards it and then we get it and we're like, yeah, on to the next thing. Or this isn't what I thought it would be. Yeah, So like, whether you're managing us or like working with us, just kind of like having some patience around that. And also like seeing the upside to that, which is
Mhm.
like we can bring a lot of like genuine enthusiasm to topics that might otherwise be like boring. And that can be infectious and it can kind of like unstuck projects that are like kind of just going nowhere, where you really just need like someone who like, for whatever reason, gets a dopamine fix from whether it's Marketing Cloud or Salesforce developer or
Yeah.
whatever, to come in there and like kind of light a spark. So, all these downsides also have upsides, I think, and it's important to, kind of be accommodating of that and recognize both. I'd also say, you know, I think things like exercise and eating right and like being able to have a life outside of work
Hmm.
is particularly important for ADHDers. Um, because we are seeking that dopamine, it's not right for us to only get it from work. I think that that can be a mistake, especially when you like your work um, and are good at your work to want to do that. But then you're kind of like over relying on your clients or your colleagues for those dopamine fixes sometimes. And so whether it's a family or a hobby, whatever, like you got to have something, other ways to like get that dopamine.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, checking in about whether they're getting enough exercise. Like, I mean, you shouldn't be their therapist or their parent or their partner or whatever.
Hmm.
But like building accommodations that allow them to go to the gym, even if it's between 9 and 5. And like being, you know, if you want extraordinary results, you might have to make, which, ADHDers and other neurodiverse people can deliver on. They might need to be supported in different ways than other people. And, you kind of have to be okay with that. And not all people are, but like there are those employers and those colleagues who are. And I think it's okay to leave one of those that aren't to try to find those that are.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. That's great advice there. And how does this differ between like supporting a friend and supporting a colleague at work, right? Because I guess there's a little bit of like a professional line here, like in terms of you're working with a colleague or you're working with a peer, as opposed to kind of going out with a friend and maybe having a drink or something. Like the context is different, right?
It is, and I think it's certainly one of the areas that I struggle with the most, and I assume I'm kind of not alone in that. And yeah, I think being cognizant that like, hey, you're there to do a job. There's a role that this company
Mhm.
needs you to fill,
Yeah.
and that's all they need from you. So it's also liberating, I think, to kind of like accept that this relationship might be a bit more transactional than I would actually like all my relationships to be. But hey, in this work environment, like I'm hired to complete this project or build this data extension or build this flow, and then kind of just leaving it at that. And that's where I think having that life outside of work that you can kind of focus that extra effort into is good. But also, I do think like just being more conscious of how you might be using someone at work, not like intentionally, but to like
Mhm.
get that dopamine fix. Um, and so, yeah, like just being aware of that you might be using them for that rather than like actual friendships or relationships. Like those can survive difficult times and ups and downs that, neurodiverse people have. But a lot of times your work relationships, not necessarily like you're there to like accomplish this thing and kind of anything that's like interfering with accomplishing that thing, um, isn't healthy
Mm.
or productive in that context. And so, um, yeah. And then also I think being open to coaching and feedback.
Yeah.
There's something that's known as like rejection sensitivity that a lot of neurodiverse people have. Um, and so, like, but I feel like that's another area where, like, in our personal friendships or something, we can be a little bit more sensitive. Whereas work, we need to be a bit more professional and say, oh, they're giving me this feedback. I should really listen to it and kind of just to accept that you need to be managed. You need to accept feedback. You need to adapt to
Mhm.
what your team is telling you. And sometimes you are the problem. I think, there's this defensiveness, I think, that comes around being that sensitivity and is accepting, like, hey, like, I'm not perfect, I'm human. and I
Yeah.
might need to be making some adjustments. And it's not a bad thing. Like everyone has those things. Neurotypical people need to make adjustments too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like part of living in a society and working.
Okay. So I'm going to take us off on a tangent a little bit, but we'll see where this goes. Just leaning a little bit on what you said just then, and perhaps there's somebody that's listening to this that is perhaps on their own journey to like an ADHD diagnosis. But how, because it sounds like you have kind of first-hand experience of this, how did you realize potentially in the past that you were relying on your colleagues for those dopamine hits? Like, what did you see in yourself that now you look back and you're like, okay, yeah, I was totally doing that because I was doing XYZ? Like, was there anything in particular that you saw?
Well, so one is it's not always a bad thing. Like
Mm.
I kind of look at it as like I'm willing to go on an adventure with different people. Like I'm not like a money hoarder or like these things that like might motivate people sometimes. I mean, I like money and spending money, don't get me wrong. But, I'm willing to like, hey, like this relationship, whether it's at work or whatever, is like making me feel good. Let's go with it. So I don't want to think so it's not always a bad thing, but I do think like you're getting that dopamine fix from something and then something changes, right? Maybe it's something in your personal life. Maybe they said the wrong thing or looked the wrong way or didn't give you the attention you needed when you needed it. And then it kind of like turns into this thing where you're almost like blaming them for no longer getting that dopamine fix from them. And so
Right.
being really cognizant of that, um, I think is important. Like, yes, it might be legitimate. Like there might be flaws that this person has that you were like overlooking before because, you were getting that dopamine from them. And another thing to be kind of aware of is we're kind of drawn to drama. It's not even like intentional all the time. Sometimes it is. And I thought it was like from being gay. And maybe it is part of that too. But like, if there's like someone, particularly a woman who's a bit messy at work, like even though I'm pretty like professional and like on point all the time, like I'm really drawn to this person,
Right.
And apparently, and it's not just like necessarily messy, but like, they're like dramatic, they're, causing a lot of change or whatever. We can be really attracted to that. And so, yeah, kind of being cognizant of that and being able to ask ourselves, like, am I doing extra because it's like, and having a trusted person, whether it's therapist or not, to kind of evaluate these relationships for you is like,
Mm.
okay, is am I acting out of genuine friendship? Do I actually care about this person? Does this help me in my work goals or my career goals or accomplish this project or whatever? Versus like when I'm just like, you know, needing something from them. Um,
Yeah.
does that answer the question?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I think that's great. And I can certainly relate to the whole drama thing, but as somebody that would actively walk away from the drama than somebody that would like walk towards it. So I never really thought that there was an opposite to that, but obviously there is because we're all different, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So thinking about this now as your own journey to kind of being more ADHD aware at work, as a journey, you would have learned a couple of things along the way. And I love how you touched on feedback because feedback is important for everybody. Is there anything that, looking back on it now, you would change or do differently if you had a chance to kind of start over or do it again?
Um, yeah. I'd say looking back, I mean, there's a lot of things I would do different. But I think one of the things in particular is learning how to deal with like delayed uh, gratification or rewards. So that's another thing. Like because we want that hit like right away. In the corporate world, it's like, okay, well, we're going to wait a budget, wait until budgeting season and like come up with what we could do more for you. And it's like a 4% raise, or like, oh, I've got to do this for 3 years before I'm even considered for this other thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so, or yeah, like yearly bonuses. It's like, oh, I'm doing this awesome job in February and now I have to wait, until next year to see it in my paycheck. So like, but that's just like kind of how things work in a
Mhm.
lot of places. I do think there are places I think that have more can uh, change more rapidly. I think like the smaller firms where you can wear a lot of hats and things can change a little bit more quickly than like if you're working at Coca-Cola, Deloitte, or
Yeah.
whatnot. Um, so yeah, and then also just like trusting myself that you know there will be these times when I don't have the energy and focus, and there will be those times when I do.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times when I didn't have it, I kind of just like overreacted to that to try to like fill that void again, or I'm letting people down, I'm not living up to my expectations or whatnot. Um, and yeah, like I might leave a job or I might burn a relationship. And just like, hey, it's okay to relax. It's okay to have these like hibernation periods. And I can trust that when I'm done with that, whether it's, as rapidly as a day or a month or whatever, like, hey, the old Ed is going to come back. And like, that's okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we're talking about a lot of things. So also the importance of rest. I
Mm.
think, I was definitely one of those people who just always had to keep busy. Um, I felt like guilty or lazy or whatever if I just like watched TV all day or whatnot. Um, and that's not really true. Like it's really important to have rest time. And there's what's known as like executive dysfunction, which is when like our brain overloads often over like fairly mundane and simple things that like we just can't make decisions about. And I do think there's a relationship between making time for yourself and like resting and feeling okay with that um,
Mhm.
helps like prevent having those moments like when it really matters sometimes at work, which it often does. um, so yeah, like making that time for yourself is really important.
Yeah. Okay. And I love that because that is applicable to pretty much any role you're in, right? Like it's not specific just to this area. It's specific to a whole bunch of different roles within the Salesforce ecosystem and beyond, right?
Yeah. Oh, and then just like while we're on that, like, hey, I'm kind of like sometimes I'm really social and on it, and sometimes I'm like one of the most awkward people you'll ever meet. And like people kind of talk about that, and it can affect like how you're perceived. Like a lot of times you might get like labeled like a lone wolf when really you're like really people driven at the same time. Because of these traits. And it's just like it's one of those things like you just have to get comfortable with it, you know. Um, that's people talk. We talk about other people. People talk about you. Just like learning to be a little bit more comfortable with that, I think is really important. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So thinking about this now as a role, what's one thing you'd like to change or make people more aware of being kind of more ADHD aware at work? Is there like a common myth or misconception that people think about when they think of these things that you would like to just clarify or put the record straight, so to speak, for the audience?
Yeah, I would say that we're not disciplined. I think that's like so. There's all this like great advice out there in the world, but it might not apply to a neurodivergent brain. It's written by neurotypical people for neurotypical people. Um, and so it makes a lot of sense for them. And some of it makes sense for us too. I'm not saying It doesn't.
Mm.
But it's okay to be like, okay, well, that type of discipline just might not really work for me. It might work for like 2 days or something. That it's just not, I'm not going to make my bed every day, um, type of thing. Maybe I will. Maybe that's if that's like really what I focus on. But um, that doesn't. But for us to like maintain a job, maintain relationships, like it requires a lot of extra discipline actually, in ways that I think people might not appreciate, and it might express itself differently. Um, but we to have any amount of like success in a society that kind of operates around supporting like kind of the majority of neurotypical people or whatnot, it can be an extra struggle with us sometimes. So kind of, yeah, not for, and this is what I'm talking about. Like sometimes it gets framed as like a moral thing or like some sort of weakness in you when really it's just different. Um, and so, yeah, finding ways to kind of work with that different is okay.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess giving yourself that leadway and that room to be different and to have
Yeah,
a good day and to have a bad day, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we are now bringing the session for today to a close, but before we do close out, are there any particular pieces of content that you would like to kind of shout out or anything that might help somebody become kind of more ADHD aware at work or any other content pieces or initiatives that you're working on that you'd like to kind of shout out?
Yes. So before I forget, which I
Yeah.
did do at the beginning, I want to plug West Africa Dreamin'.
Mhm.
It's an event in Ghana in November 15th. And yeah, if you're not aware, like kind of Salesforce is pretty new to a lot of the Africa spaces, including West Africa. And it's really exciting because of that. Like they're kind of getting to build their own community and start to get like their, jobs in the space. And so like, yeah, it's really like
Mhm.
bright and interesting. And yeah, I highly encourage anyone to who can to check that out. And they're also looking for sponsors. So if
Okay.
anyone, and our money kind of goes a bit further there. So yeah, definitely look for ways to support them if you can. Um, as for like ADHD resources, I really think it's best to get a therapist, to kind of get a professional human being,
Mhm.
stick with them, like, yeah, like evaluate like whether they're the right one with you, but once you find that right one, like really try to stick with it. If you don't have insurance, you know, I'm hesitant to say this,
Right,
but ChatGPT does seem to be pretty useful in this
right.
area. But always verify what it's telling you because it's often just telling you what it thinks you want to hear. But it's definitely been trained on some pretty knowledgeable neurodivergent stuff. And I do think the question answering of prompting is really helpful with the ADHD brain. Yeah, I'll probably send some links over that we can put in our resources as well. But I mean,
Yeah.
they're like those ADHD course coaches and so on. And a lot of times, like if you have a budget, like an education budget or whatever that your company might give you, check with them to see whether it qualifies to kind of get an ADHD coach, because yeah, they're really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And just curious, are you aware of some of the other ADHD or neurodiverse programs that are being run within the ecosystem? Like, have you heard of the community group that exists
I
now? And
have, yeah. Um, I'm so involved with like so many different things that
yeah,
it's really hard to like participate in all of
yeah,
them. But yeah, there's definitely there's a mental health one, and then there's yeah a neurodivergent slash ADHD one, and there's probably multiple, I would guess, to some extent. But
yeah.
yes, definitely check those out as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for your time, and hopefully we get more people thinking about how they can be more ADHD aware at work. So thanks again.
All right, yeah, thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Take care.